Hey folks, I've been lurking around here for a while, reading through other people's stories. Some of them heartbreaking, some downright crazy, and others just plain messed up. Never thought I'd be the one writing my own, though. I guess I'm not the type to share my personal mess like this, but when life throws something at you that hits harder than expected, sometimes you just need an outlet. And right now, this feels like the right place for it. I'm not a young guy anymore, 56 to be exact. I've been through my share of drama, seen a lot, and dealt with more than my fair share of crap. So when my wife cheated on me years ago, I didn't react the way most people would expect. I made peace with it eventually, came to terms with the fact that she's just a lying, cheating bitch. Maybe someday I'll go into all the ugly details about that, but today isn't about her. This story's about something that hurt even more, a betrayal that cut me deeper than I ever imagined. This one's about my daughter. Let me tell you about her. She's 25 now, my only child, and until recently, she was the absolute center of my world. From the moment she was born, I was wrapped around her little finger. I always used to say she was the best thing I ever did, you know? I raised her with all the love I could give, hoping she'd have a better life than I ever did. For a long time, I thought I had done a damn good job. She's smart, independent, and beautiful. Everything a dad could hope for. A couple of years ago, she married this guy named Andrew. He's a solid guy, 2 years older than her, but the age gap didn't matter. He was everything I could have wanted in a son-in-law. Heck, he was everything I would have wanted in a son if I'd had one. Hardworking, polite, respectful, the kind of guy who shakes your hand and looks you right in the eye. No BS, just straightforward. He treated my daughter well, or at least I thought he did, and I couldn't have been happier when they got married. To everyone around them, they seemed like the perfect couple. You know how people say that, right? Oh, they're so in love. They're perfect together. Well, I actually believed it with them. I thought they'd have the life I always wanted, but never had. They had everything going for them, and I was proud of her, proud of him, and proud of the life they were building together. But, as you probably guessed, things weren't as perfect as they looked on the outside. This all went down a few months ago, and I'm still struggling to make sense of it. My daughter and Andrew had come over for the weekend, something they did regularly. Hang out, grill some steaks, have a few beers. Just normal family time, nothing out of the ordinary. But that morning, I noticed some tension between them. It was obvious they'd been arguing about something, but I didn't think much of it. Married couples argue, right? My wife and I fought more times than I can count, so I brushed it off, thinking it was no big deal. Later that day, my daughter said she was meeting up with some friends for lunch. Nothing unusual. She had this close group of friends from high school she'd kept in touch with. Meanwhile, Andrew stayed back with me, saying he wanted to have a beer and relax. I figured it would be a good time to talk, maybe give him some advice on whatever they were fighting about. Or maybe we'd just sit in silence and enjoy the beer. Sometimes it's not about talking, you know? As she was heading out, I walked her to the door like I always do. Just being a dad, making sure she had everything. And then it happened. Something slipped out of her bag and hit the floor. It was small, barely noticeable, but I leaned down, thinking it was her phone or some change. But no, it was a condom. Now, I've seen plenty in my time. A condom's not exactly shocking. My wife and I used them back in the day, before things went downhill. So at first, it didn't seem like a big deal. She's married, after all. Married people have sex, right? Maybe they were just being careful. But the more I thought about it, the more something didn't sit right with me. Call it a gut feeling, but something felt off. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions right away, so I picked it up and walked back to where Andrew was sitting, trying to keep things light. I handed him the condom with a chuckle. "Hey, this must have fallen out of your bag," I said, half joking. He gave me a strange look and said, "Thanks, but we don't use these." And that's when it hit me. Hard. My stomach dropped, and the room felt like it got 10 degrees colder. I looked at him, and he looked at me. We both knew something was terribly wrong. "It fell out of your wife's bag," I said, doing my best to keep my voice steady even though my heart was pounding in my chest. Andrew froze. His face turned pale like he'd seen a ghost. I could see the gears turning in his head, trying to make sense of it, but we both knew there wasn't a good explanation for this. That's when I realized everything had just changed. I didn't say anything else. I just went to the fridge, grabbed 2 beers, and handed him one. We cracked them open and sat there in silence, the air between us thick with unspoken words. Neither of us knew what to say, but we both knew everything was about to fall apart. After what felt like forever sitting in silence, I finally turned to Andrew. The guy looked like he'd just been hit by a freight train, staring blankly at the floor, with that damn condom wrapper between us like a bomb waiting to explode. I could almost see the wheels spinning in his head, the pain already starting to show on his face. For a moment, I wasn't sure how to start, but someone had to say something. "You know what this means, right?" I asked, keeping my voice low, calm. He nodded, still not making eye contact. I could tell he didn't want to confront it. Hell, neither did I. But this wasn't something we could sweep under the rug. Not when it was staring us right in the face. "I'm on your side here, man," I said, and I meant it. I know she's my daughter, and blood runs deep, but I've never had any respect for betrayal. Never. You've always treated her right, and I've seen that. I leaned back, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. We got to figure out what's going on here. No need to jump to conclusions just yet, but this is bad. Andrew finally looked up at me, and man, he looked wrecked. His eyes were glassy, his hands trembling as he gripped that beer bottle. This wasn't the same guy I knew, the steady, confident man who'd married my daughter. He looked like someone who'd had his world shattered right in front of him. "I don't even know what to think," he muttered, his voice barely audible. She wouldn't do something like this. We've always been good, you know? I just don't understand." "I know," I replied, trying to offer something to hold on to. "But people change. Sometimes they do things that even the people closest to them can't understand. We need to figure out where this condom came from and what the hell is going on here." Andrew nodded, but I could see the struggle in his eyes. His mind was running 100 miles an hour, and I knew how much this was tearing him apart. I'd been in his shoes once, with my wife, and watching him go through this brought back more than a few painful memories. I didn't want him to endure what I had. No one deserves that kind of betrayal, especially not a guy like Andrew. "We don't need to blow things up just yet," I said, trying to keep the situation calm. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Maybe there's a reasonable explanation, but we have to talk to her, find out what's really going on." He took a long drink from his beer, staring off into space. "Yeah," he finally said, though his voice sounded hollow. "Yeah, we'll talk to her." I reached over and gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "We'll figure this out. I've got your back. No drama, no bullshit. We'll handle this like men." But even as I said it, I had this sinking feeling deep in my gut that things were about to get messy. Once you start pulling at a thread like this, the whole damn thing unravels before you know it. And Andrew? Andrew was already hanging on by a thread. We sat there in that heavy silence for a while longer, neither of us knowing exactly what to do next. But one thing was clear. We needed to find the truth, no matter how ugly it turned out to be. And something told me it was about to get real ugly real fast. After sitting in that uncomfortable quiet, I couldn't take it anymore. The questions were eating at me, and Andrew looked like he was falling apart right in front of me. I figured we had to get some answers before things spiraled any further. "Why don't we try calling her?" I suggested. "Maybe she can clear this up. Could be nothing, right?" Even as the words left my mouth, I knew I didn't believe it. Everything about this situation screamed that something was off, but I had to give her the benefit of the doubt, for Andrew's sake, if nothing else. Andrew grabbed his phone, his hand still shaking as he dialed her number. He put it on speaker so we could both hear, and we sat there waiting for her to pick up, but it just rang and rang. Then it went to voicemail. He tried again. Same thing. My gut tightened, and I saw that same fear creeping into Andrew's face. "Maybe she's just busy," he said, though his voice wavered, and I knew he didn't believe it either. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Do you have any of her friends' numbers?" "The one she's supposed to be with." Andrew nodded and started scrolling through his contacts, eventually finding the number of one of her close friends. He put the call on speaker again, and after a few rings, the friend picked up. "Hey, it's Andrew," he said, trying to sound steady. "Is Emily with you right now?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before her friend answered. No. I'm at home. I haven't seen Emily today." "Why?" Andrew's face went completely pale. I saw his lips start to tremble, and he looked at me, eyes filled with confusion and raw pain. It hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't some innocent mix-up anymore. This was worse. Much worse. "Did she say anything about meeting up with you or the other girls?" Andrew asked, his voice cracking. "No," her friend replied, clearly puzzled. "I didn't hear anything about plans today." Andrew muttered something about it being a mix-up and quickly ended the call. The second he hung up, it felt like the tension in the room was about to snap. He looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed and brimming with tears, on the verge of breaking down completely. "She lied," he whispered, almost like he couldn't believe his own words. "She lied to me." I could see the pain hitting him full force, and I felt my own blood begin to boil. My own daughter, lying to the man who had done nothing but treat her right. A man who loved her with everything he had. The rage inside me bubbled up, and all I wanted to do was punch something, scream, let it out. But I couldn't. Not yet. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Okay, let's not lose it just yet. We need to stay calm and figure out where she is." That's when it hit me. There was one more way to track her down. "Do you guys have that app? Find My iPhone or something like that. Can you track her phone?" I asked, feeling a strange sense of determination now. Andrew blinked, wiping at his face. Yeah, we have that. Our phones are linked for stuff like that." "Good," I said, feeling a surge of urgency. "Pull it up. Let's see where she is." He fumbled with his phone, his hands shaking, but eventually he got to the app. After a few seconds, a blinking dot appeared on the screen, showing her location. My heart pounded as I stared at it. "She's not where she said she'd be, is she?" I asked, though deep down I already knew the answer. Andrew shook his head slowly, his face crumpling with devastation. "No, she's not." That was it. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and said, "Let's go. We're going to find out where she is and what the hell is going on." Andrew didn't hesitate. He was up and out the door, trying to pull himself together, but I could see how much this was killing him inside. As we drove, my hands gripped the steering wheel too tight, and the anger simmered just beneath the surface. The closer we got, the more the betrayal hit me. My daughter, my flesh and blood, lying, cheating. I could feel my temper boiling over with every mile. Andrew sat in the passenger seat, staring at the app like it held the answers to everything. His face was pale, completely drained of life, and he didn't say much. I glanced over a few times, but all I saw was a man completely broken, hanging on by a thread. No matter how this played out, we were about to find the truth, and neither of us was ready for what was waiting on the other side. We pulled up to the address, and the tension in the car was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Andrew hadn't said a word the entire drive, and I could see the cold sweat on his forehead. His knuckles were white from gripping his phone too tight. I knew whatever we were about to face wasn't going to end well, but there was no turning back now. The house we pulled up to was just your average suburban home, nothing special. But to us, in that moment, it felt like it was hiding every ugly truth we'd been dreading. I parked, and we both just sat there for a second, staring at the front door like we were waiting for someone to come out and tell us this was all a mistake, that we had the wrong house, that none of this was real. But we both knew better. "Let's go," I muttered, breaking the silence. We stepped out of the car and made our way to the front door. I knocked, not too hard at first, but when there was no answer, I knocked again, this time louder. Still nothing. I pounded my fist against the door, hard enough to make it rattle, hoping someone would answer and put an end to this nightmare. But the house stayed silent. "We should go," I said after a minute, trying to protect Andrew from whatever ugly truth we were about to face. Or maybe I was just trying to protect myself. "She's probably not." Just then, the door opened, and there she was, my daughter, but not alone. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and the look on Andrew's face told me he couldn't either. Then we heard it, a moan, faint but clear enough that there was no mistaking it. It came from inside the house, and in that instant, everything changed. Andrew's face contorted into something I'd never seen before. The calm, quiet guy I knew was gone, replaced by pure rage. Before I could even process what was happening, he was slamming himself against the door, trying to kick it in. His first attempt didn't move the door, and neither did the second, but he wasn't giving up. His face turned beet red, veins popping in his neck, and I could tell he was losing it completely. "Andrew!" I shouted, grabbing his arm to stop him, but he shoved me away like I wasn't even there. His eyes were wild as he spotted a stone in the flower bed near the porch. Without hesitation, he picked it up and hurled it straight through the front window. The sound of shattering glass ripped through the quiet neighborhood. But at that point, neither of us cared. We were beyond caring. Andrew didn't waste any time climbing through the broken window, not even noticing the jagged glass that almost sliced him. I followed, heart pounding, knowing we were too late. The moaning had stopped, and instead, there was shuffling upstairs. They'd heard us. They knew we were coming. Andrew charged up the stairs, taking them two at a time, and I was right behind him, my heart racing as fast as his. When we reached the bedroom door, it was cracked open, and inside, there she was, my daughter, half naked, scrambling to pull on her clothes, her face flushed with panic. And next to her, some guy I'd never seen before, his pants around his ankles, fumbling to get dressed as quickly as possible. I froze. It felt like someone had punched me square in the chest, knocking the wind out of me. My own daughter, my little girl, the one I'd raised and loved, standing there like she was a stranger. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I just stood there numb. But Andrew? He wasn't frozen. He was a man possessed. "You fucking bastard," he roared, launching himself toward the guy. Andrew wasn't thinking anymore. He was out for blood. Nothing else mattered to him in that moment. He was going to rip this guy apart, and honestly, I couldn't blame him. I barely managed to grab Andrew before he reached the guy, wrapping my arms around him and holding him back with all the strength I had. He thrashed against me, screaming like a wild animal, tears streaming down his face. If I'd let him go, I don't know what would have happened. Hell, part of me wanted to let him loose and watch that guy get what was coming to him. But I couldn't let Andrew throw his life away over this. In the middle of all the chaos, I heard sirens, loud and getting closer. Before I could even process what was happening, cops were bursting through the front door, guns drawn, shouting at us to get on the ground. My heart pounded as I let go of Andrew and raised my hands, trying to show the cops we weren't a threat. "Get on the floor! Now!" one of the officers shouted. We didn't have a choice. Both of us dropped to the ground, hands behind our heads. They cuffed us and dragged us out of the house like we were criminals, not even caring about what had just gone down. As they hauled us outside, I glanced back at the guy who had been with my daughter. He was standing there, smirking like he'd just won the lottery, watching as we were shoved into the back of a squad car. The bastard must have called the cops the second he heard that window break. The rage inside me boiled over, but I was helpless to do anything. The ride to the station was a blur. I was too angry, too numb, to think straight. All I could see was my daughter, half-dressed, like she hadn't just destroyed two men's lives. Andrew sat beside me, staring blankly out the window, no longer crying. He looked dead inside, like a man who had just lost everything. When we got to the station, they didn't keep us long. My daughter and that guy vouched for us, told the cops it was a misunderstanding. Yeah, a real misunderstanding. But whatever. They let us go a few hours later. No charges, no court date. Just two broken men walking out of that police station, lost in our own thoughts. We didn't say much on the way out. We just walked down the street in silence, trying to make sense of what had happened. Eventually, we found a bench and sat down. The cool night air felt like a slap in the face, like the world was mocking us for even hoping things could ever go back to normal. But nothing would ever be normal again. Not after this. I put my hand on Andrew's shoulder, trying to offer him something, anything. "We'll get through this," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "We're gonna get through this." Andrew didn't respond. He just nodded, staring off into the distance, lost in whatever hell he was living in. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. The next day, after a sleepless night, Andrew sat across from me in my kitchen. We didn't talk much. We just drank coffee, trying to wrap our heads around the wreckage of the day before. Andrew looked like a man who had hit rock bottom, and I knew he needed a way forward. So, I gave him the only advice that made sense. "You need to file for divorce, Andrew," I said firmly. "Don't drag this out. Staying with her will just destroy you. You got time to start over, find someone who actually deserves you. But staying? That'll kill you." He didn't argue. He didn't fight it. He just nodded, like he already knew it was over, but needed to hear someone else say it. "Yeah," he whispered, his voice hollow. "You're right." We sat in silence after that, the weight of everything hanging between us. I could feel my own heart breaking, not just for Andrew, but for me too. My daughter, the girl I'd raised, wasn't who I thought she was. And that truth was settling in deeper than I wanted to admit. Later that day, I sat my wife down and told her everything that had happened. I expected her to be furious with our daughter, to see the same fire I felt. But honestly, I should have known better. She took it hard, don't get me wrong, but the outrage I anticipated just wasn't there. Maybe she was in shock, or maybe she didn't want to accept that our daughter was capable of something like this. Either way, what followed was a string of days filled with brutal fights. We were all at each other's throats, ugly, drawn-out battles between the three of us. The next day, our daughter came home, trying to explain herself. But really, what was there to explain? She denied cheating at first, swearing it wasn't what it looked like, but we both knew that was a load of crap. The more she tried to justify it, the more my anger flared. My wife tried to play mediator, but there was no making peace that day. The house became a war zone of shouting and accusations. And by the time it was all over, I wasn't even sure if we'd ever talk to her again. For a while, we didn't. Months slipped by, and I hardly heard a word from her. My wife was crushed by it, but I had already begun to make my peace. During that time, I stayed close with Andrew. Weirdly enough, we became even tighter. Maybe it was the shared pain, or maybe I just respected the way he handled it all. We started hitting the golf course together on weekends, followed by a few beers back at my place. It became our thing, and in a strange way, it felt like while I was losing a daughter, I was gaining a real friend. Then, out of nowhere, my daughter reached out, saying she wanted to make things right and move past all the mess. I agreed, mostly for my wife's sake. We had dinner at our place, and for a fleeting moment, it almost felt like old times. Almost. But there was still this thick tension between us, this big thing that had never been resolved. That night, I laid it all out on the table. "I've taken you off the report," I told her, keeping my voice steady. She blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" "The inheritance. You're not getting a penny of it," I said. "It's either going to charity or to Andrew. He's earned it more than you ever have." The room fell dead silent. I could see my wife shift uncomfortably, but she stayed quiet. Then my daughter, my own flesh and blood, just lost it. "You can't do that," she screamed, her face twisted in rage. "That's my money. I deserve that inheritance." It was like a switch flipped in her, and for the first time, I saw her for who she really was, entitled and selfish. I had spent my whole life trying to give her everything she needed, but in that moment, it hit me I had failed to give her perspective. She believed she was owed everything, just because she was my daughter. "No," I said, standing firm. "You don't deserve a thing. Not after what you did to Andrew. Not after lying to all of us. You're on your own now." She stormed out of the house that night, screaming about how unfair it was and how I was ruining her life. But I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. She had made her choices, and now she would have to live with the fallout. Since then, I've stayed close with Andrew. In a way, He's like the son I never had. Most weekends, we hit the golf course, shoot the breeze, and kick back with a few beers. It's become a steady routine, a little bit of normalcy in all this chaos. He's moving on too, slowly but surely. As for my daughter, who knows if we'll ever fix things? Honestly, after everything that's happened, I'm not sure I even want to. It's been over a year now since everything fell apart, and I still struggle to make sense of it sometimes. How did things get so out of hand? But life moves on, whether you're ready or not. And in all that time, I haven't spoken a word to my daughter. After that final blow-up, it's like the door between us slammed shut, and neither of us has tried to pry it open since. My wife, though, she's different. She just can't seem to let go. Slowly, she started reaching out to our daughter again. At first, it was just a few texts, simple stuff like, "How are you?" or "Hope you're doing okay." Then it turned into phone calls. Not often, but enough for me to notice. She thinks she's being discreet, like I won't figure it out. But I hear the change in her voice when she's on the phone, trying to keep things calm so I don't blow up. Part of me gets it. Mothers can't just shut off their emotions. But me? I made my decision a long time ago, and I'm sticking to it. I told my daughter she wasn't getting a dime, and I'm not budging. After what she did, she has no claim to anything I've worked for. She crossed a line, and now she has to deal with the consequences. My wife might want to smooth things over, but not me. I'm done. Meanwhile, Andrew's moved on. He's done what any smart man would do after being burned. He's picked up the pieces and found someone better. A few months back, he met a new woman, and she's nothing like my daughter, thank God. When he introduced her to me, I could immediately see what he saw in her. She's calm, grounded, the type of woman Andrew needs. She's got this quiet strength about her, the kind that just makes you feel at ease. No drama, no attention-seeking, just solid and steady, exactly what Andrew deserves. When Andrew brought her over to my place for a drink, it was obvious he was in a better place. He was laughing more, cracking jokes, like some heavy burden had finally been lifted off his back. We spent the afternoon in the backyard having a few beers and talking about everything but what had happened with my daughter. For the first time in a long while, things felt normal. No dark cloud hanging over us, no tension. Just two guys shooting the breeze. One night, though, Andrew dropped something on me that caught me completely off guard. He told me that, not long after things ended between him and my daughter, she had already found herself a new boyfriend. That stung more than I expected. The idea of her just moving on like what she did to Andrew didn't matter, like none of it was a big deal. But in the end, I can't say I was surprised. I knew my daughter better than most, and if I'm being honest, I'd seen this selfish streak in her long before all this went down. It just took something this big to really bring it to the surface. But here's the kicker. Andrew told me that the new guy didn't last long either. They dated for a few months, and then, just like that, it was over. Not hard to figure out why. Relationships born out of someone else's wreckage usually don't stand the test of time. What really threw me, though, was when Andrew told me he actually knew the guy. Small world, I guess. They ran into each other one day, and Andrew, being the guy he is, invited him out for coffee. I think part of him wanted to see what kind of man my daughter had moved on to, maybe get a sense of who she was with. But things didn't go the way I expected. Andrew didn't just have a casual chat with this guy. No, he laid it all out, every brutal detail. He told him about how my daughter had cheated, how she lied, and how it tore their marriage apart. Andrew didn't sugarcoat any of it. He wanted this guy to know exactly who he was dealing with. He even told him about the side of my daughter that people don't usually see until it's too late. A few days after that conversation, the guy dumped her. Just like that. My daughter never saw it coming. When Andrew told me, I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to feel relieved, like some form of justice had been served. But there was another part, the part of me that still saw her as my little girl, that felt guilty. No matter how much she hurt me, she was still my daughter. And as mad as I was, I didn't want her to experience that kind of pain. I looked over at Andrew and shook my head. You shouldn't have done that, I said, my voice softer than I expected. I never wanted her to get hurt like this. She's still my daughter, after all. Andrew shrugged, not looking too apologetic. He had a right to know what he was walking into. I wasn't about to let him go through what I did. And maybe he was right. Maybe that guy deserved to know the truth. But it didn't make it sit any easier with me. This wasn't about the guy. It was about my daughter. As much as she had messed things up, I didn't want her to end up alone, hurt and broken. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a heavy sigh as the weight of it all hit me. Maybe she grew up to be a bad person, I said quietly, more to myself than to Andrew. Maybe that's on me too. Andrew didn't say a word. He just nodded like he got it. Maybe he did. Because when you strip it all down, it's easy to forget that people don't just wake up one day and turn bad. They become that way bit by bit. Sometimes we miss the signs until it's too late. And in some way, I think that's on me as much as it is on her. Now, over a year later, my life has settled into a quieter rhythm. Andrew and I still hit the golf course on the weekends, still sit around afterward, beers in hand, talking about anything and everything. It's become our routine, filling the gaps left by everything that's happened. He's got a good thing going with his new girlfriend, and I'm honestly happy for him. He deserves it after everything he's been through. As for my daughter, who knows? Maybe one day she'll find her way back to us, but I'm not counting on it. Right now, she feels more like a distant memory than a real person. And honestly, I'm not sure I'm ready to revisit that memory anytime soon. Maybe it's better this way.